Welcome back to Crime Chats. Tiny room, microphone, endless crimes.
Yeah!
Today Lisa's going to be diving into Virginia Giuffre's memoir, Nobody's Girl, and everything that encompasses her childhood, her upbringing, her life with Jeffrey Epstein, and then how she was overcoming all of it. Viewer discretion is advised.
Today we're talking about Nobody's Girl, the memoir written by Virginia Giuffre, one of the most well-known survivors connected to Jeffrey Epstein. Now, before we get started, I want to say a couple things. First, this episode discusses sexual abuse, trafficking, and exploitation, so listener discretion is strongly advised. Second, the book we're discussing today is a personal memoir. That means the events described are Virginia Giuffre's account of her life and experiences. Our goal today is not only to talk about the allegations involving Jeffrey Epstein and his network, but also to understand how Virginia's life unfolded before she ever met him. Because one thing that becomes very clear in this book is that the vulnerabilities that traffickers exploit don't just appear out of nowhere. They often grow out of instability, trauma, and circumstances that begin years earlier. In Virginia Giuffre's case, trauma for her started when she was just 6 years old, riding horses until the sun went down. So today we're going to walk through the story of Nobody's Girl, almost chronologically, from Virginia's childhood to the moment she met Ghislaine Maxwell, to her time in Epstein's orbit, and finally to how she escaped and eventually became one of the most public voices speaking out about the case. Virginia Giuffre was born Virginia Roberts in 1983 in Sacramento, California. But California wouldn't be where she spent most of her childhood. Her family eventually moved to Florida, and that's where much of her early life unfolded. In the book, Virginia describes her childhood as chaotic and unstable. Her father, Sky Roberts, worked in various maintenance and technical jobs, but the family struggled financially and moved frequently. Also, Sky Roberts was known to be an alcoholic and physically abusive. Her mother also was an alcoholic, Lynn, but we'll get into her a little bit later. For a child, constant moves mean something very specific. You're always the new kid. New school, new neighborhood, new teachers, new classmates. And for Virginia, it meant never really feeling settled anywhere. She describes feeling like her life was constantly shifting under her feet. But the instability wasn't just about moving. Virginia describes the atmosphere in her home as tense and unpredictable. Her father had a quick temper, and discipline in the house could be harsh. At the time, she writes about feeling emotionally unsupported by the adults around her. Like I mentioned, her father drank, but her mom also drank, so there really wasn't anybody to take care of her at home. She describes that on a lot of occasions, she'd have to put herself and her little brother Skydie to bed. Like many kids growing up in chaotic households, she describes feeling invisible, not protected, not prioritized, not really heard. And that emotional isolation becomes a theme throughout the memoir. It's important to note that Virginia later alleges sexual abuse by her father, something that she says began during her childhood. She talks about when she was 6, her father bought her this horse named Alice, and she loved Alice, and she was so excited to come home from school every day and just ride this horse that she loved, and it was such a special gift. But shortly after that, the grooming and molestation started. It got so bad that eventually Virginia's father was giving her to his friend. A disgusting, vile father and a disgusting, vile friend. These allegations have been strongly denied by her father, of course, but in the memoir, Virginia describes the abuse as one of the most traumatic parts of her early life. Whether discussing the emotional chaos at home or the abuse she says she endured, Virginia paints a picture of a childhood where safety and stability were largely absent. And that matters. Because one of the things experts often point out about grooming and trafficking is that predators often look for young girls who already feel disconnected from stable support systems. Kids who feel alone, kids who feel unwanted, kids who are desperate for someone to care about them. And honestly, throughout the beginning of this memoir, there is a lot of trauma and a lot of terrible stories that she tells, and just these men, these traffickers, they have like this superpower where they feel it and they can smell it on people, and they know who to target, and it's gross. According to Virginia's account, by the time she reached her teenage years, she already felt like she didn't belong anywhere. As Virginia entered her teenage years, things at home continued to deteriorate. Eventually, the situation reached a breaking point. At around 14 years old, Virginia started running away from home. She became, as she describes in her memoir, an angry truant, defiant and prone to emotional meltdowns. She says she was hanging around lots of older kids, partying, drinking, and doing drugs. Running away is often portrayed in movies as an act of rebellion or adventure, but in reality, it's almost always a last resort. Honestly, I'm surprised and happy that she had this sense of agency and self-preservation to run away. Home was evil. Kids who run away usually feel like the place they're leaving is worse than the uncertainty of the outside world. And for Virginia, it was. Virginia describes living on the streets in Florida, sometimes sleeping in places that were unsafe or unstable. She was incredibly young, barely a teenager, and suddenly she was trying to survive without a safety net. So during this time, even before Epstein, she ends up meeting this older gentleman, and by this time she had been abused so often that I don't think she would have been able to get away if she wanted to. I don't think she would have realized. She didn't know what an honest man was. She didn't know what a good relationship was. She was living on the streets, and then this black limo showed up, and this older gentleman told her he could help her, and then she went. And she spent the next 6 months in this group of women who were basically slaves to this man in his 60s. At this time, Virginia is only 15. And then after 6 months, he just throws her to one of his friends when he's done with her. I can't. But luckily for Virginia, this one has a happy ending. The FBI end up storming this new guy's house and saving her. Eventually, Virginia's situation led to law enforcement involvement, and she ended up in juvenile detention. Now, for many young people, juvenile detention can become a revolving door. But in Virginia's case, it also became a turning point. Through a program connected to the facility, she eventually found a path that allowed her to start rebuilding some stability in her life. And that path led to a job that would ultimately change everything. After leaving the juvenile detention facility, Virginia found work as a locker room attendant at Mar-a-Lago, the private club in Palm Beach owned by Donald Trump. Her job was relatively simple. She worked in the spa area helping guests in the women's locker room. For a teenager trying to rebuild her life, it was a rare opportunity for stability. She had a job, she had a routine, she had a sense of direction. But it was also at this job that she met someone who would dramatically alter the course of her life. One day, in walked a woman that was fancy and sophisticated and polished. That woman was Ghislaine Maxwell. Maxwell presented herself as friendly and sophisticated and engaging. She was dressed to the nines, and so obviously Virginia took notice of that. She struck up a conversation with Virginia and showed interest in her life. To a teenager who'd spent years feeling invisible, the attention probably felt meaningful. It probably felt good. Also, working as a spa attendant, Virginia had dreams of becoming a massage therapist. Maxwell eventually told Virginia that she worked for a wealthy man who needed someone to provide massage therapy, and she suggested that Virginia might be perfect for the job. Virginia said she had no reason to suspect anything unusual. Also, look at the life she had had before. Again, there probably wasn't any kind of voice in her head telling her, hey, this is probably a scam. Please run away now. She was used to abuse. So here's a woman that's actually offering to help her and mentor her and give her stability and an income, and she gratefully took it. Virginia says she had no reason to suspect anything unusual. She believed she was being offered a legitimate opportunity, and so she accepted. That decision would bring her face to face with Jeffrey Epstein. When Virginia first met Jeffrey Epstein, she was around 16 years old. Epstein was already an extremely wealthy financier with connections to powerful figures in politics, business, and international society. Virginia says she was brought to Epstein's mansion in Palm Beach to perform massages. But according to her account, the situation quickly, from the first day, became something very different, very sordid. She writes that Epstein began pushing sexual boundaries during these massage sessions, and eventually, she says, the encounters became sexual abuse, not only from Epstein, but also Maxwell herself. Virginia describes feeling confused and manipulated. On one hand, Epstein and Maxwell presented themselves as benefactors. They gave her money, they offered her gifts, they spoke about opportunities and travel. But at the same time, they were gradually drawing her deeper into a world she didn't fully understand. This process is something experts describe as grooming. Grooming often involves building trust, providing financial support, creating dependency, and normalizing inappropriate behavior over time. And according to Virginia's account, that's exactly what happened. Before long, she says she wasn't just giving massages. She was being sent to powerful men connected to Epstein's social circle. During this period, Virginia says she was flown to various locations connected to Epstein. These included Epstein's mansion in New York, his ranch in New Mexico, the U.S. Virgin Islands island, his little island, Little St. Jeff's, and Europe. Epstein's private jet, sometimes referred to as the Lolita Express, became an essential part of how his network operated. Virginia describes being introduced to powerful and wealthy men. She alleges that Epstein and Maxwell expected her to have sexual encounters with some of these individuals. Virginia says she was on call all of the time, and she'd get in trouble if she didn't answer the phone. Among the most famous allegations connected to Virginia Giuffre is her claim that she was trafficked to Prince Andrew, the Duke of York. That allegation will later become the subject of a highly publicized civil lawsuit. Throughout this time, Virginia describes feeling trapped. She was young. She had become financially dependent on Epstein. He paid for her apartment, and the people surrounding Epstein were among the most powerful individuals in the whole world. Leaving didn't feel simple, and it didn't feel possible. But eventually an opportunity appeared that would change everything. This opportunity was that, allegedly, according to Virginia's account, Maxwell and Epstein approached her and asked if she would carry their child for them. Literally give birth to Epstein and Maxwell's kid. And basically do all the mom duties until she wasn't needed anymore. I can't understand. She describes in her book that she kind of, over the course of her being in this sex trafficking ring with Epstein and Maxwell, she was being called for sexual favors, but then eventually Epstein was also calling her into his room to just tuck him in at night and sing him to sleep and talk to him to calm him down at the end of the day. I guess he saw her as nurturing, like a mom, which makes me want to throw up, but anyway. So Virginia Giuffre didn't just want to say no, but she saw this as an opportunity to escape. So she counteroffered and said, look, if you actually make good on your promise to make me a massage therapist, then I will do this for you. So Epstein and Maxwell, they paid for her to go to a class at massage therapy school in Thailand. While traveling in Thailand, Virginia met a man named Robert Giuffre. Robert was working as a martial arts instructor. According to Virginia, the two quickly formed a connection. For the first time in years, she felt like someone saw her as a person rather than an object. Eventually, she told him about the life she had been living under Epstein's control, and together they decided to leave that world behind. Virginia married Robert, and the couple moved to Australia, where Robert was from. For the first time in years, Virginia began building a life that looked more like normalcy. They had children, 3 of them. They created a home. And for a while, the past seemed like something she could keep buried. But the past didn't stay buried. In 2005, a teenager in Palm Beach reported sexual abuse by Jeffrey Epstein. That report triggered a police investigation. Eventually, investigators began reaching out to other potential victims. Virginia Giuffre, of course, was one of the people contacted. She chose to speak with investigators, and she shared her experiences. Over time, she became one of the most visible survivors connected to Epstein's case. She helped expose the broader network of allegations surrounding Epstein and his associates, and she eventually filed a civil lawsuit against Prince Andrew. That lawsuit was settled in 2022 without an admission of wrongdoing, but it drew massive international attention to the case. So in the last episode, Hillary went over the non-prosecution agreement, and I find it so unbelievably disgusting that Virginia and the other survivors didn't know about this. They had no idea. Virginia talks about in her book about how excited she was to file charges against Jeffrey and actually face him in court and hold him criminally responsible, because he was, for all of this trauma and abusing her for all this time. She wanted him to go away forever. And, I mean, he should have. Unfortunately, though, because of the non-prosecution agreement, all she could really do is file civil suits against people. And then, because she got settlement money, that was the only restitution that she could get. That was the only really closure that she could get from this case. She was never going to see Epstein behind bars for what he did to her. People were going after her and saying things like she made it all up. She just wanted to make money. But she had no, like, it was either let it go or at least she could hold him civilly liable and at least she could get something, right? I don't understand why people were going after her for that. I hate people. So to make this a little simpler, I went ahead and just made a timeline of the civil actions that Virginia Giuffre had or did against Epstein and his network. Because of the non-prosecution agreement, like I said, stupid, but it was there, so she did everything she could. So here's the timeline. So in 2009, she filed a civil claim against Jeffrey Epstein. And in it, she claims that Epstein sexually abused her while she was a minor, trafficked her to other powerful men, forced her to engage in sexual acts in exchange for money, and transported her across state and international lines for sexual exploitation. So these key allegations were that Epstein began abusing her around the age of 16. He paid her for sexual encounters. He instructed her to recruit other girls, and he trafficked her to wealthy associates. The outcome of this civil lawsuit was the case was ended in a 2009 settlement with Epstein for $500,000. The settlement also included a broad release clause covering potential co-conspirators. In 2015, there was another defamation lawsuit filed against Ghislaine Maxwell, because Ghislaine Maxwell came out and said that Virginia was a liar, so she sued Maxwell. So the reason for the lawsuit was that Maxwell publicly called Giuffre's accusation lies in media statements. So Giuffre alleged that Maxwell defamed her, knowingly made false statements, and attempted to damage her reputation and credibility. The key allegations in the complaint were that while the lawsuit itself was about defamation, the filings also repeated Giuffre's claims that Maxwell recruited her while she worked at Mar-a-Lago, groomed her for Epstein, trained her to give sexual massages, and transported her to wealthy men for sex. The outcome of this was the case settled in 2017. The litigation produced thousands of pages of depositions and evidence, later known as the Epstein-Maxwell civil files, many of which were eventually unsealed. Third was a defamation dispute with Alan Dershowitz in 2019 to 2022. Defendant was Alan Dershowitz. The background was Giuffre had previously accused Dershowitz of sexual abuse in court filings tied to Epstein litigation. Dershowitz denied the allegations and claimed Giuffre was defaming him. Giuffre's legal position was her filings maintained that Epstein trafficked her to powerful men and Dershowitz was among those men. The outcome in 2022 was Giuffre withdrew the lawsuit, stating she may have mistakenly identified him. Both sides dropped their claims. And in 2021, a civil lawsuit against Prince Andrew was filed by Giuffre. So the defendant was Prince Andrew, and this was filed under New York's Child Victims Act, which temporarily allowed lawsuits for older abuse claims. The legal claims, Giuffre alleged Andrew committed sexual battery and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The key allegations were she claimed Epstein and Maxwell trafficked her to Andrew in 2001 when she was 17. She alleged that Andrew abused her at Maxwell's home in London, Epstein's New York mansion, and Epstein's private island in the U.S. Virgin Islands. The lawsuit argued that Andrew knew she was a minor and knowingly participated in Epstein's trafficking operation. Andrew denied all of these allegations. The outcome of this was that in February 2022, the lawsuit ended in a financial settlement with no admission of wrongdoing. Virginia Giuffre's civil cases revolved around three core legal claims: sex trafficking and sexual abuse by Jeffrey Epstein, recruitment and grooming by Ghislaine Maxwell, sexual abuse by powerful men she says Epstein trafficked her to, including Prince Andrew. Her lawsuits were not just about individual incidents, they were aimed at exposing what she describes as a large trafficking network built by Epstein and his associates. So the story told in Nobody's Girl isn't just about Jeffrey Epstein. it's also about vulnerability. It's about how instability, trauma, and lack of support can make young people incredibly susceptible to manipulation. I mean, from the jump, this woman, this girl, this little girl from the beginning was manipulated and abused and made to feel like she was nothing. Virginia Giuffre's memoir attempts to show the long path that led to the moment she crossed paths with Jeffrey Epstein. Because stories like this rarely start with the crime itself. They start years earlier, with unstable homes, with kids who feel invisible, with opportunities that seem too good to question. Whether listeners view this memoir as a survivor's testimony, a personal narrative, or part of the broader Epstein investigation, it undeniably played a role in bringing global attention to the case. This memoir reminds us that the people caught in these networks are often very young and very vulnerable, long before the world ever learns their names. So, to finish, I wanted to share a quote from her book from the end. Sadly, Virginia Giuffre lost her life to suicide in April of 2025. And it's really sad because at the end of this book, she seemed like she was really overcoming this, and she was honest that, you know, she still had her moments of deep depression, and she still had moments where she couldn't find the light, but she looked at her kids. She had 3 beautiful children, and she saw them, and she wanted to be okay for them. There's a lot of conspiracies. You know, there's a conspiracy theory around Epstein's death and around Virginia Giuffre's death. I don't know. I don't know if there's evidence to support the conspiracy that Virginia Giuffre, her death wasn't a suicide, but I don't know. Just reading her book, the end, it really does seem like she's really trying. But unfortunately, sometimes it's just too much. But I wanted to read this quote that I really love from her. Virginia writes, "In my mind, I hold a picture of a girl reaching out for help and easily finding it. I picture a woman, too, who, having come to terms with her childhood pain, feels that it's within her power to take action against those who hurt her. If this book moves us even an inch closer to that reality, if it helps just one person, I'll have reached my goal."